the way we approach the scenario is based on actual scenarios the individual have experienced.
So for example, what have you done previously?
Right.
Okay, not hypothetical kind of, you're stranded on an island, that kind of question.
Right. But if they have actually stranded on an island and said, hey, did you actually have you ever been stranded on an island? Yes, I have, right? That changes the game, right?
You're hired.
Welcome back to another episode of Wise and Shine. I'm your host, Dawn, SG Budget Babe, and today I have on set Alex, who's my co-host.
This is Alex Low, and you can find me on @AlexLow_, the growth mindset coach.
Yes, and aside from Alex, we also have a special guest called Andrew with us today. Andrew is in a line of work that's very interesting, and we're gonna piece that out as the podcast interview goes on. But basically, what we're going to be discussing about today is really, in terms of interviewing, right? For both the employers and for employees. How do you interview better? How do you stand out? How do you fight back against AI and all the problems that are coming out with AI? So to preface this, we've seen a rise of deepfakes and AI becoming a problem in the workplace, right? AI resumes, AI interviews, even tools. In the initial phase right now, a lot of the resumes and CVs and submissions are all being filtered out by AI, no longer just a human. And it has caused a lot of different problems that we are only beginning to see and understand, but we'll get more and more. So before we dive into that and how to potentially address these issues, we'll have Andrew introduce himself and the work that you do. Over to you, Andrew.
Hi, thank you, Dawn and Alex, for having me here. So my name is Andrew Chai. I'm the founder and CEO of Attitude. Attitude is the X factor. So it's spelled with AttituX, right? We highlight the X because really is that attitude a good one usually? Well, in some cases, you can say the bad ones too, right? The good ones tell you how to work together more cohesively as a team. The bad one tells you those are the ones you need to manage out. So Attitude is founded using some degree of AI and software to measure a person's attitude using doodle drawings. Not how well they draw, but what they drew. And within a short span of 5 minutes of drawing or less, we are able to identify the values, the cultural fit, the attitude of a person, and whether they fit the job and the company that they're going to work with.
I love it. What a succinct elevator summary pitch. Yeah, we're going to dive into his work in this interview. But to start off, I want to ask a really important question. How does an interviewer tell if a candidate is truly honest?
This is a very tricky question, and we faced it in the last 20 years of our work. So when we first started this process of interviewing people, we know that people naturally can lie when they are required to. People naturally have the propensity to protect themselves. And when they go for an interview, they're already prepared mentally what they can or should not say, right? And
yes.
Career coaches will teach them. So you can only know if somebody is truly honest if you have some facts about them, right? So I use the example of money. If I know you have $100 in your wallet right now and you didn't tell me, and I say, hey, brother, how much do you have in your wallet? And you said, well, about 100. Well, because I have the facts, I then know that you are telling the truth. But if I didn't know, then it's a shot in the dark. It's 50-50%. So the key is, what facts do you know about the individual that you can validate? So we call this the validation.
But that can be quite hard because in an interview, the only thing you know about the interviewee is the CV.
Right.
And the CV could be a packaged set of lies, let's be honest,
That's
right?
true.
So how do you then verify that?
So CV is one of the self-reporting tools. We write our own CVs. So actually in our process, we put the CVs aside for a few reasons. One, human factors. When you read a very good CV, you naturally form in your head a perception of the person. You're impressed. The flip side is if the CV is not well written, you already discounted them. And if you had enough experience with CVs like I have, seen about 100,000 easily, actually more, but we lost count, you start to formulate an idea, and that idea in your head actually impedes an objective decision making. So our process actually, over a period of time, we decided the best way is not to look at a CV, but to use some form of drawings, which we built over the last 20 years. Now, you will recall that children draw when they were very young. 1.5, 2 years old, they start drawing, and it's doodle drawing, right? But whatever is in their subconscious mind, they draw out. What occupies their mind. and we can identify underlying issues. Actually, for 300, 400 years, psychologists have been doing that to identify. You might see in a Hollywood movie, children draw something traumatic, and then the psychologist say, oh, they're going through some trauma, and then they interpret what that trauma might be. So this science is actually already well documented. What we did was we reverse engineered the algorithm to data label and data match what is drawn and what does it represent, the characteristics of it. So if I'm able to get somebody to draw even before they come for the interview, I already have some degree of facts. Now, it's not possible to get 100%, but our current platform arrives at about 85% accuracy, which means 8 out of 10 questions we ask will hit the nail. So from there, we formulate our questions, and that is used for validation. We at least know 85% of that person in terms of what they're thinking, what their values are, what their beliefs, how they behave. Are they stubborn? Are they easy to work with? Are they considerate? Are they open-minded? So based on that, we can then validate. So that's the knowing the $100 in the wallet. And if we ask the questions and they can give us an example to validate what we already know, we know they're truly honest.
Right.
Does it mean then that, Andrew, if you are not even looking at the CVs, qualifications are not important or experience?
No. Yeah. So actually, qualifications are extremely important, but the fundamental values must be there. So if I know the person is honest, I know the experience or what they wrote is 85% honest. So if I use 85% as a benchmark. So we will look at the drawings first and the results, and then compare it with the resumes. And together we then ask the relevant questions. Yeah.
But in this case then, okay, so what you're proposing is to check before to get some semblance of facts around that candidate instead of just relying on the CV and then double check it later on. But let's talk about during the interview then. So there's been interesting cases recently where candidates basically, especially for remote working jobs, right, or remote interviews, they hire someone else to take the interview in their stead.
That's something new. I never heard of that.
It is very new. And the technology now is quite advanced that you can even superimpose your actual face and stuff like that. So it's like a deep fake video. So the interview is ace, the person gets a job. But then on day one, when the person turns up at work, and because it's remote, or sometimes it's physical, you're like, hey, that's not the person I interviewed. Looks like him. Mannerisms acts a little bit like him, but it's not him. How can they overcome this? How can the managers or interviewers be able to spot and prevent this from happening?
Now, we actually already experienced this about 15 years ago.
15?
Yeah, 15. Not with deepfakes, but because they were fully remote, right? So the person who interviewed took the test, went through the whole thing, and the person who actually showed up was a different person. But because the interviewing team changed,
it was not picked up.
It was not picked up. Okay, so how was it picked up? Was because the skill sets were different. Then when they did a review, we found out, 3 out of 10 people were not the same folks they initially interviewed. So that's also 15 years ago, we decided that we need to put in a few measures. And the best way to measure it is we make sure they draw the doodle drawings on the spot. So we know who is the person that we are ultimately interviewing. And if we pick the right people, this problem goes away. That means that dishonest folks don't even get a chance to get into that stage.
And I know a little bit about your history, right? And you've got that feather in your hat in the airline industry. Maybe at this point, you can share a bit more about that. And I think everyone would be very interested to know about that as well.
Yeah. So after September 11, there was an opportunity that we saw because a couple of airlines actually got into financial difficulty because they lost a couple of aircrafts and they filed for Chapter 11. So when we looked at the P&L, I realized that the 3 biggest costs was aircraft, because that's the hardware, fuel, because that's the energy to burn to get the plane going. These 2 you can sell, you can lease away. The third is the hardest, software, right? People. You just cannot get rid of people overnight. So as a result, we started thinking, hey, why don't they outsource? So I came up with the outsourcing model for the aviation industry. That means they are our employees, but they're actually wearing the airline uniform and they fly. So think of IT outsourcing, but for the aviation industry. Okay. Then we quickly got into a problem. The problem was when any airline recruitment, thousands of people show up, right? I mean, even Singapore Airlines, right? They had easily 2,500, 3,000 people. They'll stand in a line, and after a while, the resumes all look the same.
Yeah.
Once you get past the first 10, right? Number 11 and the rest of the 2,500 all look the same, right?
Not to mention those who were successful before who have asked their seniors, hey, you got in, can you teach me what am I doing is right?
So that become the stereotyping resumes, if you will, right? That is like the AI resume now that all look very good. They're all very polished. So at that stage, we realized if we looked at the resumes, we'll be making a wrong decision. Okay. Number one is self-reported. Number two, if they were fresh from school, they have nothing. So what are we making our assessments on other than education? If they came from the same university, they're all the same to some degree. And it's impossible after a while to look at so many people and make an objective. So we started looking to build a process. So we first used the established psychometrics at that time. One of them was 16 personality factors. That's the one that our client used, which is Emirates. And they have a team of psychologists, 30 of them, and they provided us the assessments results. And we started using drawings. And after a while, we saw some trends. We saw the description actually was very close to the drawings that we asked them to draw. And then we did validations, right? So the bulk of the work, the hard work that we did was taking the drawings, the results, and validating with the candidates when they were eventually hired. Is this who you are? Now, over a period of time, and we did that every day, we got enough data to start seeing that the drawings does have some correlation with the results. And then at some point, we were more accurate than the traditional psychometrics. We ditched that and we built our own. So that's essentially what we did. The problem, we found a solution, and that solution became our database today. And with AI, we built the AI to match.
So that sample size you're talking about, hundreds of thousands or
it's
millions?
in the millions.
It's in the millions.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay.
The sample size is in millions. The combination of the potential reports that we can generate is 1.5 trillion today, right? And that's growing, which means there's no two reports that are the same. I want to touch on a little bit about that. Anybody who knows psychometrics will say, hey, there's something called a Barnum effect. A Barnum effect means it's so general that if I give you and anybody else, they read it and say, yeah, that sounds like me. They call it horoscope effect. That's because there are a limited number of total reports that can be generated. Then the Barnum effect sets in because it's so generic. But in our case, that doesn't apply, right? And the way we prove it is when we ask few people who have done it to just swap their reports. And immediately they'll say, no, that's not me, right? It's highly specific. So it can only be highly specific when there's no duplicate report. Think about it.
When the combination is a lot.
It's a lot bigger, right? So we're about 192 times the world population now, and it's growing. Every time somebody draws a new drawing that we use the AI to teach and interpret, we actually have a much higher combination, right? Because the numbers get multiplied. Yeah. So 1.5 trillion, I think we'll cross 1.6 trillion next week. Yeah, we're about 1.58 right now. Yeah.
Wow. Let's talk about the interviewing process. So we've only been alive for a few decades, all of us combined, but we've already seen so much changes in the interviewing scene in the last few years, right? Like, I mean, just maybe use myself as an example. Just about 15 years ago when I was interviewing, you see the job on the job portal or on the company website. You write in, you write a nice polished looking cover letter, you put your CV in, your resume, and then you send and you wait for an interview callback by the person. Or sometimes if you want a shortcut, we would then go on portals and find who is the recruiter or the head of HR, the person actually reading these, email in and then you say, hi, I would like to apply. I've submitted on the website, and you get like a second touch point. Today, like even that is kind of outdated because these people don't even look at it anymore. It's through the technology, right? The first batch is all processed by technology. There's no human involved. You go through a generic portal, some outsource it to third parties. You fill in and then the tech reads it and they filter the first batch. And sometimes, depending on the size of the organization or the processes that they have in place, it's not just one filtering by the technology, but multiple stages before it actually hits a human. And like earlier on, you're talking about your friend, right? What was his experience like?
He sent in 700 resumes, not just in Singapore, of course, it was to an international employers. And he only got 10% right of responses from the employers.
And out of this 10%, how many translated into a chance of a video interview at least or in-person interview?
So you're looking at another 50% maybe of that 10%. So 5% of that 700 that he got an interview for, whether it was in person or virtual. And I think maybe another 50% of those for second round of interviews.
Wow.
He is still searching.
How long has it been?
It has been 6 months.
Oh, wow.
It has been 6 months.
Sorry, my brain cannot grab 700 in 6 months because I'm that girl who basically sent out 3 resumes and then got a callback right away. But that was previous era. Right nowadays, also, there was no technology to put from just one resume, create 700 versions. Today, the technology exists. So I can imagine everything gets multiplied, gets harder. So this then raises the question, do you, Andrew, in your opinion, feel that there is a standard set of questions that interviewers should ask for every candidate for a certain role or a certain entry into the company? Or do you think every single thing needs to be customized? How exactly do we deal with this?
So talking about that 700, let me use that as a example. The same talent acquisition staff will probably see about 700 applicants or more. And they also have the same challenge about the percentage. So assuming you were a talent acquisition, TA, for example, after you read about 50 to 70 resumes and you find 3 that you were interested in, you stop reading the 630. That's why they don't get called up, because they happen to be the 71st candidate whose resume was being presented. Even if you go through a computer software that read keywords, they call it an applicant tracking system, ATS for short. And the ATS will screen down that 700 to maybe that 50% or 10%. And with AI, this actually compounds the problem. So I know that Airbnb, when they put up an application, a job post, because they are 100% almost remote company, they have 1 million applicants.
Wow.
For one position, right? So if you have 1 million applicants, let's just say 10% of that gets through the initial applicant system. You still have 100,000 resumes for TAs to read, right? So either you have a very large TA group that reads every single one, or you hit a certain number and you said, I'm not going to read the rest. Now, there is some filtering, of course, by country, by nationality, whatever that might be, language skill sets, job experience, and so on, right? And in some cases, even by universities, right? They only want a certain cohort of universities. So that's the problem that the current job seekers will face. Should there be a standard set of questions to ask if you manage to get through the first round? I think the answer is yes, but it is not complete. It's only 50% complete. So in our opinion, it needs a rethink of the entire process. So let me just kind of touch base a little bit of how we would have done it. We would have put all 100, 700 or 1 million applicants through our system. Our system measures some amount of compliance, right? If you get an email saying you need to do something, and this assessment is not long, but please bear in mind, if I ask you to do 100 question that takes an hour and a half.
But yours takes 5 minutes, right?
Yeah, we take 3 minutes. I mean, if you can't spare 3 minutes, you're probably not the right person for the job.
Or you don't want it bad enough.
Right, you don't want it bad enough, right? So it's only 3 minutes now. Of course, we don't tell you, but if they bother to Google, they'll see that it's less than 5 minutes, right? But if they don't even want to spend, so they have a mindset. So this person will bring that mindset with them to deal with uncertainty, right? You tell them, hey, I'm going to introduce you to do this project. Hey, boss, don't tell me I'm already busy. That's going to be the same behavior. So our requirement is after your initial screening, you short it down to 50% or whatever that number, put everybody through as best you can and see who responded fast. We do track. And from our system, we automatically highlight the top 1% or top 3% or 5% through a ranking system, right? Then read the resumes. So you read the top 10 candidates that have fit that criteria. You might be able to find 1 or 2 from the top 10 that says they have the right experience. It's probably not difficult. I find that very few people are silly enough to apply for a job that they totally don't qualify. They must have done some assessment, depending on the level, of course. Entry level, that's probably less accurate a statement. But at the middle to high level, we're not silly folks, right? We won't apply for a job that we 100% don't qualify.
Yeah.
You might get a few who are just trying their luck because they are trying to move to a different country. So maybe the job requires a certain language that they don't have. Then that gets filtered out. Anyway, LinkedIn filter that out for you automatically. But most people that do qualify would naturally be in the good fit. The only thing is, does the values fit? The value is extremely important, right? I mean, if you were dating somebody, you want us to see a resume with you. Think about it that way. And you fact find along the way. But ultimately, you want to know, do both of us share the same value system? Do both of us have the same vision of where we want to head? Do both of us share a similar food or culture that we like, habits that we like? All these are all values driven, right? They're not experience driven, but they're values driven. So values is really the fundamental distinguishing factor before you consider. If you get that part, the experience and the rest of it can come later. Versus the other way around, right? If you flip it and say, oh, this person has all the right experience, all the right competency, but then they're going to fight when they get into the team. It's just a matter of time where either the team breaks or the person gives up. Then the attrition goes up. So we advocate the importance of assessing the right attitude first, and not saying we don't evaluate the rest. Evaluate the rest once that part is out. Is correct.
I still don't understand how drawing can show attitude and can show value. So I think we definitely need a little bit more illustration and examples there.
For our dear listeners, if you're tuning in, we're going to split this into two portions. So if you are a manager or in the role of interviewing or hiring, the first half, we're going to focus on that perspective. But if your main mandate or your main objective you hope to get out of today's episode is from the perspective of a job seeker, such as Alex 700 resume friend, you can skip to the later half of this episode where we'll be covering from that perspective instead. So back to the question, how do drawings show that?
Okay, so I'll use the pink elephant as an example. Right? If I ask you to not think of a pink elephant, you indirectly have to first, at least the minimum, have to think of an elephant, and then maybe pink, and then you, right? So our mind works in that way. So in our situation, we don't give you a blank piece of paper to draw. We actually flash a symbol, and that symbol is like the pink elephant. When we flash that symbol, you inevitably, subconsciously, have been using the same style of thinking in addressing that particular situation. So I'll give you an example. Decision making. Decision making is always a crossroad. So if you think it's the right decision, you move forward. That's upwards, right? I'll move forward. If you think, oh God, I made the wrong decision, then you take a step back. That's down. If you say, I'm not sure, you just stay put, right? That's in the center. But if you found a way around it, is left or right. This identifies a cross. And that's decision making. So when you see a cross, it is a form, it's asking you, how do you go about making a decision? That's essentially what it is, right? Now, the key is we have in our 10 symbols, we have 5 of them that you can draw crosses. And one of them is measuring what you do when you are at stay put. And you just can't trick your reflex. When your mind sees that symbol, it will think, what is your predominant state of you making a decision in that particular idea? And whatever you draw tells us how you go about thinking.
Am I the only one who is not seeing a cross? Because when you're talking about decision making, right, I was actually thinking, what I saw in my head was a weighing scale. What did you see?
I see like a fork, right? Left or
You
right.
saw a fork.
Yeah, because decision making is either this or that, right? Not so much of a cross to me. But
Right.
I guess, so it's a question.
It's not a question, it's just a symbol.
It's just a symbol. And you're supposed to add on to that symbol.
Yes.
Oh, you add on top of that cross.
Yes.
So my weighing machine doesn't sit there lah.
You could draw a weighing machine on that
On the
cross
middle,
lah.
is it?
Yeah.
Okay. So in this case, like Alex and I both have different interpretation. How would that translate to the
Okay, so we look at the 5 potential crossroads or crosses that you can draw, and we draw correlation between them. So just based on one, I won't be able to tell you, but because there are 5 possible crossroads. So our system also tests which one is the real decision making for you as a result out of the 5, right? Now, without opening up the black box, I can assure you that whatever you draw has a meaning at the end of it. And that meaning, we correlate with all the others to validate, is that the way you go about making decisions?
Okay.
So it's a permutation of the 10 and not singly or purely
That's
on
right.
one.
So interesting. Okay, so I'm going to move on now to another part of the interviewing process. What do you see are the current pitfalls in today's interviewing process that can be prevented or should be eliminated? So without talking about adding on your system, we described the process earlier on. What do you think should not be the standard today?
The first thing is human bias because of reading resumes and because humans are limited. Right? Even if they put through a system, you still have a sizable number to go through. You cannot put through the ones that's been filtered already, the accepted one, and through the system and get a different answer. I guess you can prioritize and say, well, I only want this particular keyword. You might be able to screen that down, right? But you still end up with a sizable number. All the systems that I've seen easily will give you at least maybe 10%. Right? And that's still a sizable number depending on how many applicants that you have. And then the human factors sets in. They read it, and that's where they decide yes or no. And because there's so much subjectivity in how it's being presented and it's self-reported, that is the first thing that we should eliminate. The human factor should only come in at the very end. We should allow the thing to be as objective as possible to get to a stage where at the end, it is, do I like the person? It's like chemistry. People can still validate much better than software can.
Which would mean involving the manager
Right.
in that process.
Yes,
At the end.
at the end. or nearer the end. Maybe not right at the end, but nearer the end, right? Then the other thing that is inefficient in the current system is when the interviewers interview the candidates, they use a standard set of questions. The standard set of question is not meaningful. Number one, we all have different experiences. And depending on how you ask that question, each of us have a different context and experience with it. But if you use a set of standard questions and say, this is the benchmark, then essentially you're not putting the candidates at the same playing field. Scenario questions example is a very theoretical way. If I'm smart enough, I will be able to think on the spot to tell you how I'll solve it. But what has it taken? It has taken the emotions out of this solving problem process. But in reality, when a difficult situation happens, people are emotional. And once they're emotional, they think differently. It's from the heart, no longer from the head. But you ask a head question, you get a head answer. But the actual situation is a heart problem because they are personally vested, they're emotionally tied, right? That's why it doesn't reflect the actual situation. So we can all look at an accident and say, why did that person react that way? But if you were the one having the accident, your behavior is totally different. So that's some of the current pitfalls. Not evaluating the candidate based on who they are, but evaluating them based on who they think you want them to be. So you get theoretical answers, you get imagined scenarios, you get imagined solutions, and then the pitfall comes at the later stage. How come this person is not as resilient as they say they were, right? Because that's what interviewers want to hear. They want to hear all the positive stuff, right?
Yeah.
But in reality, the negatives are buried. Now, in our system, we make sure that both are surfaced because every strength is a weakness and every weakness is also a strength.
But I still see merit in this kind of scenario-based questioning, right? Because with that kind of questioning, it sort of like gives the interviewer a chance to assess the candidate's ability to either think on the spot, crisis manage, or even how will they allocate certain resources to be able to deal with certain situations.
So the way we approach the scenario is based on actual scenarios the individual have experienced.
So for example, what have you done previously?
Right.
Okay, not hypothetical kind of, if you've got 3 things, what are you going to do with it, right? If you're stranded on an island, that kind of question.
Right. But if they have actually stranded on an island, right? And said, hey, did you actually have you ever been stranded on an island? Yes, I have, right? That changes the game, right?
You're hired.
Because they're telling you from experience, right? So we always ask them to share an experience of what happened, which is the closest to what we want them to be able to solve.
But
right?
This experience could also be belief, right? Like a friend of a friend told that story and they make it and use it as their own.
So in our process and in our system, we actually, number one, tell you who they are and what type of potential experience they might have. And then we give 3 questions that bring out the examples. Now, I know your friend example is true because if I ask you to repeat, you can repeat, correct? Okay. So how do you know a person's experience is true? When they're very specific, they give you date, they give you time, they give you name. If I ask you 3 questions and after the 3rd question, I say, hey, you remember just now you shared the experience, can you repeat again? You'll be able to repeat it.
This one like police asking questions, interrogation.
Yeah. So because it's real, they can always repeat. And once you get specifics, right, you will know it's real.
I just had a thought, like people first date, you can also apply the same thing.
Yeah.
Because interviewing, not just for job, right? Even for potential marriage partner, also same technique. Huh?
Right.
Right. Yeah, I want to talk about cultural fit because usually when you work in an organization, there are 2 aspects of cultural fit, right? One is, do you fit the organization's values? The second really important one, but let's talk about, is do you fit the manager's value and style of working? I'll use myself as an example. Many years ago, when I was fairly new and I stepped up into recruiting, my first hire for the team, I thought initially everything was done right. You screen through the CV, old school method, you read through the CV, you try to take out your human bias, you interview and then you double confirm, ask questions. And then later on when we came in, we then realized that the style of working did not fit. For example, this hire said he did not need to be micromanaged. But in reality, I learned that he needed to. And I'm the manager who I hate micromanagement because having been on the receiving end last time, I kept feeling like, you micromanage because you don't trust me to do my work. And it's so inefficient because I have to spend so much time justifying and proving to you that I have done my work, when that same time can be used to do other more productive activities. So I don't apply that. And I need people who work with me to be at the same wavelength, right? So I was unable to discern that out because, like you said, the candidate has in their every interest to lie in order to protect, in this case, protect their chance of getting the job. How can an interviewer use or do in order to assess these two separate cultural fits?
Okay, so let me talk about the company's culture first. The company's culture is the first, foremost, most important aspect of the hiring process. And there are varied number of culture requirements, right? We recommend that you keep it to no more than 2.
2.
Yeah.
Wow.
And there's a reason for it. The bigger the number, the harder the match. 1.
True.
The harder to find the person. Well, you can argue we can do 3, but why 2? The 2 are the non-negotiable culture. Meaning if they don't even have that, don't pass, right? Because it's a matter of time becomes a problem. So using an example of, let's say somebody who don't need to micromanage, right? This person needs to be independent. Then one of the culture is independent. The second one is they has to be trustworthy, right? I mean, these 2 things come hand in hand, right?
Yeah.
Which means what they say, they do. So if you have these 2 as the fundamental culture, you already resolve that part of the problem of not having to micromanage them. Then the other one is the personal style of working, right? So I'll use me as an example. I'm quite innovative in how I think and approach to things. And then when I want to suggest a new idea, because I'm an entrepreneur, I don't want my staff to say, boss, no leh, cannot do, without even trying, right? So I need open-mindedness. I need them to at least hear me out, and then they go and try. Then I include open-minded as part of my cultural fit, values fit. And I also want people to be considerate, because they may approach me at a time when I'm very busy or extremely stressed, or I need to have a board meeting, or I don't have time to revert to their questions, right? So I want people to be considerate. The consideration is also helpful when they spend money, because they think 3 times before they say, hey, should I request for that particular budget to spend that? Or when they go out and they entertain a client, they are mindful the company is paying for it. So all these little things add up in terms of cost, right, for a business. So these are the other aspect that should be included in the manager's values and the company's values.
So it's 2 times 2.
Well, actually, in our system, we allow 5 and 2. 5 of the managerial's values or the job requirement and 2 of the company. So 7 altogether. And in our experience, this 7, if you get a perfect fit, which is extremely difficult, you'll be very silly not to hire the person. Even if they don't have necessarily the right experience. Because actually, arguably, all skills are transferable. You just need to identify. I mean, we are all born without learning how to eat and run and walk. We learned it. We are flexible enough to learn new skills. It's just a matter of, are we given an opportunity or not? So that comes to the question about the candidates, right? Actually, a lot of candidates are very flexible people and very talented. We just need to give them the opportunity to learn and show that, right, that they can pick up a new skill.
So for an interviewer, I've attended interviews where I meet the line manager first and then I meet the C-suite. But I've also attended interviews where I meet the C-suite first and then I end off with the line manager. So which actually is a better way of doing things?
Did you meet the HR at all?
Of course, HR first lah, right? Or maybe HR with line manager but is it the senior dudes first or the line manager first?
Line manager first, because that's the one you face day to day, right?
Yeah.
So that's the most important. The C-suite is basically maybe just to assess that they like the culture fit or not. But in our system, we already addressed that upfront. So it's very important for us to get that alignment upfront. Once the alignment is upfront, right, it's like if you make a mistake of the top 3, you still get top 3, you know? That's what we're saying. Yeah. So line manager first, because that's the one that have to work on a day-to-day. And then C-suite at the end.
Hey, I hope you're enjoying Wise and Shine so far. I'm your host Reggie, aka your Chief Financial Coconut, and for us to continue to do this show so that you become a tad bit wiser every week, you gotta like, share, subscribe, help us beat the algorithm, but even more importantly, if you can, comment in the comment section below, let us know your thoughts and also some questions that you would love us to answer. Yep, now back to the show.
Okay, we're going to switch it now. For those of you who are waiting, because you might be in a similar situation, we're going to ask from the point of view of a job seeker. So back to Alex's friend, 700 resumes. How to stand out?
Yeah, because, you know, if AI senses everything, right, especially the first, second cut, and what you thought you had was already the best, then how are you going to stand out?
Right. So this is what I did recently for a candidate. He's looking for a job. So I actually said, hey, before I send your resume to my contact, I need you to do the doodle assessment. We call it draw metrics. It's a drawing that measures certain metrics, right? Because one, my contacts know the business I'm in, just like Alex, understand it, right? They expect me to at least have done some preliminary assessment or screening. I forward their attitude report together with their resume. And then I said, hey, I've done the assessment. I see that this is a good hire and you should do your own assessment and validations as well. So that's one way. But I can't be doing that for the whole world. I can't be doing that for every candidate. But if you're watching this and your company or the company that you would like to be able to approach is missing a big part of you, you can always reach out to me on LinkedIn and see how I can help you. The way to get the attention, obviously, is to do a lot of research about your potential employer. You must be able to, through the first email, and never send a generic one, although you can have a generic one. But always send an email or a cover letter that goes with your resume if you feel you need to get some attention, right? And if you were the right person for the job and you were really interested in that company, you must be able to have done enough research, enough public domain information out there for you to be able. So let me share my own experience, right? I wanted to work for a company called Honeywell when I graduated. So when I saw the opportunity to apply for a job, I didn't approach the hiring manager. I approached the executive secretary and said, can I have the annual report for the last 5 years in Honeywell? It's a listed company. And she asked me, why do I want to do that? Right? Why do I need that report? I said, because I want to know what problem I can help Honeywell solve.
But she bothered to get it for you.
Yeah, she bothered to get it because I said I was going to help solve a problem. And she knew I was coming for an interview.
And that time no IR lah. That's why the
right.
ES.
Yeah. So setting yourself up differently. And then I really studied the annual report of Honeywell. I look for an angle where I can ask a question the interviewer cannot answer. You got to think, if you really are the expert in that area, you don't have to ask something that's out of your expertise. But if you're really the expert in the area and you deserve the job, you should be able to find an angle where you said, hey, I might have done it differently. And that's the angle that will capture, right? And if you have that and you send it in the initial cover letter, I think a discerning hiring manager will be able to pick that up and say, hey, this person made a point that caught my, that have done some homework, right? I mean, we hear it a lot of time about interviewers saying, hey, the candidate didn't come prepared. They didn't research the company. They couldn't tell me what is different, right? And why I should give them an opportunity. This is where the initial hard work is.
I want to just throw a dampener over here. Because using Alex's friend again as an example, 700 resumes. And I can imagine your friend does not want 700 jobs out there. He is desperation, not getting a response. So you just shoot as many arrows and hope something come back, right? But let's say out of that 700, the candidates then go and research, let's say 5 or even 10, the really hardworking ones, to go and make sure there's a fit. Problem here is we also know in reality, sometimes the job is posted, but it's actually not open. It's already filled, but the HR has to do it because, the government policy that says you to do certain steps before you can fill. You have to be fair, open competition, but actually it's not open. It's all just, it's fake. And for the job seeker, it's really hard to be able to tell this. So what advice would you give for job seekers like that, where they are, in their opinion, they're really trying very hard to do that research, to really find a match with the company and doing everything in their means, but yet still get hit with these repeated failures over and over again?
Actually, there are 2 steps to the entire interview process. The first one is getting the door open. That's the one that you're currently addressing. The next one is what happens when the door is open. What do you need to do differently at the interview to stand out, right? These 2 requires a lot of work. So if I were advising a candidate today, I'll say, first of all, do you fully understand what skills that do you have and what passion do you have that is unique? So it all starts with self-awareness, right? The only way you could conquer anything is how aware are you of yourself, of your limitations, about your strengths, and a clear understanding of your weaknesses and blind spots, right? So that self-awareness process is what is actually already lacking in a lot of job seekers. They don't really know, right? So they're just casting the net and hoping something happens. Then they are setting themselves up for failure because they are not setting themselves for success. They are allowing it to be by chance. So we should not take our life by chance. We should actually control every aspect of our lives, right? In terms of where we want it to hit. So I would tell them first, identify what are you really, really good at, that if anybody were to test you, you aced it. If you don't have that self-awareness, you won't even know which company you should apply. Then the next thing is, does that company need your expertise? What can you add value? The top 5 companies that they decide, Now, with LinkedIn, they need a different strategy today. With LinkedIn, they need to be able to showcase their expertise even before they decide to go for the job interview. Right? One is there's history, right? There's a feature page and so on. So I'm an advocate of using LinkedIn. 20 years ago, not that relevant, but today, 100% relevant. 100% of a recruiter, even if you send them a resume, will look at your LinkedIn first and then decide whether they want to talk to you further. So the profile needs to be set up properly. The expertise can be shown in the post on an occasional basis, and maybe write an article about what you think about something and have that be on a feature, right? Because all these will add up over time, and then wait for that 5 companies to have an opening and then apply. And if you study that 5 companies long enough, you probably will have enough information about them to be able to structure an email or a letter for them to call you. Okay?
Right.
I was going to ask a question on, so are we potentially, or are candidates potentially aiming too high, right? That's why they're not getting what they are applying for. But you answered that question with that self-awareness part. What is that talent that you have? But I can also imagine where there are individuals that, could be you out there that say, but I'm just like him and her and everybody else. There's nothing special about me. Does that mean that I'm forever going to be jobless? How do we address that question?
That's the white collar, blue collar question. If you are like anybody else, that's the blue collar question. But number one, I don't believe that anyone is a me too. Part of it is my religion and the people I met. Everybody has something unique to offer. It's whether they were able to bring that out in succinct and easy way for others to see it very fast, right? And that comes with practice. Actually, if they've gone enough dating, they would have known that they need to say the right thing at the right time to the right person, right? Both male and female. So the dating process is actually the best way for people to recognize what is it that I'm bringing out that the other party sees I'm unique. And then when they go for an interview, assuming they got past the first stage and they got called, that interview process, even if they didn't want the job, because they were just fishing, they should try to maximize the experience.
Yeah.
Right? The experience allows them to practice delivery. The experience also allows them to get a sense of how do I assess if I really want to work for the company. It's meaningless to go for an interview, get the job, and then say, oh, I think 3 months later I need to interview again. Because it's not the right fit, right? So it is always a two-way process. As much as they work hard to get the initial foot in the door, they also need to understand and assess whether it's a good fit. Because that determines their next interview, whether it's 3 months, 3 years, 10 years, whatever that might be. Then the question is, how do they stand out from the rest, right? As I mentioned, one is the amount of homework that you do. The second, which is the more important way of interviewing, is who does most of the talking? Is it the interviewer is doing the talking or the candidate is doing the talking? I suspect a lot of people is the candidate doing a lot more talking. Right?
Correct.
When the person doing a lot more talking, they are the ones selling. They're not getting the interviewer to buy. They have to change that mode around. Think of them shopping for something that they already want. The person who's shopping on something they already want is the one asking the question, hey, tell me more, what's the product? It is the one doing a lot of the questioning, a lot of the talking, right? The other person is the one just providing factual information.
I love that analogy actually. It's really just rewiring your framework and perspective, because if you see the interviewer as someone who's shopping for the best fit candidate, and it goes back to what you said earlier on about being aware, and you got the chops, then it's about sharing enough information to make that person want to know more about you in order to make the decision to buy, rather than you going there and say, hey, I'm a blah, 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 and you just shoot off your mouth and you may end up saying the wrong things or things that are not even relevant to what the interviewer is looking for because you just talk too much. But when you change that mindset, that's a great way. I also, while you were talking, it reminded me of something else. So, in answer to your question, right, one thing I truly believe in wholeheartedly is that everyone has a role to play. And I find that it may seem after a while a bit generic, taking your doodle part aside, but if we just look at general tests, they kind of classify you into set categories. If you do the MBI team test, for example, you are an INTJ or whatever it is, and it just feels like there's a limited choice. Everyone starts to look the same after a while. But I realize in reality, it's always the person's values, the person's experience. And if I can just sum it up in one word, right, it's the blend. It's a blend of experiences and everything that came before that day or that moment that makes that person so unique, because you will never be able to find someone else with that experience. We use you as an example, Andrew. Your before is a blend of so many different industries and roles that have put you to where you are today. Same for you, right? Your history as an athlete and then coaching and then leadership. And for me, quite by chance, this is on hindsight that I realized this as well. The reason why I'm able to do the work that I do is because I was trained in journalism and I have a passion and curiosity about finance. But no one in the past would have been able to tell me that if I wanted to do financial education and writing, I needed these two blend of skills. It was not the case.
Right.
So I realized, like, if someone goes back to that awareness piece and really understands what is your blend that makes you so uniquely capable or suited to the role, then I don't think that's a problem. They don't even need 700 resumes. So maybe the question is going back to, instead of 700, find out who you really are first, get that awareness, and then find the good potential matches and then work hard on those.
Can I add something about the 700 resume?
Sure.
If that person was my friend, I'll say, hey bro, you don't need 700 attempts, right, to market test whether your resume is speaking to them or not. Why don't you try 7 friends first? I've seen a lot of resumes, and of course I've seen very good ones. And I've also seen the Me Too. The Me Too's are the ones that are stating the obvious. They basically said, oh, I am an account manager and my responsibility is I manage account, blah, blah, blah. Most hiring manager know what an account manager means. So don't state the obvious in terms of what your roles doing. Unless you're doing a job that nobody understands, then you need to describe what their job function is, right? So if the resumes were written from a framework of achievements, and if they go into the job, any new job, and said, what am I going to write about when I leave this job? What legacy am I going to leave? Then they are thinking about preparing their resumes for a better position in the future, right? Or a progressive, not necessarily better, but a progressive position. That's number one. Number two, are they doing their next job now? If they're not doing the next job now, then they have nothing to market. Then they're lateral movement. You got to do your next job now so that when they go for an interview, they say, actually, I was in sales, but I did marketing. I volunteered in marketing because marketing is a different skill set than sales. So very similar transferable skills showing that you can move. That is always what companies want to see. They want to see that you can grow. And if they write that in their resume, from the perspective of achievement, if they write what they're doing in the future, they got something to talk about that the hiring manager will be interested to know.
I like that progression part, right? And growth. Yeah, and maybe we can close off the session with final question, right? So we talked about the interviewer, we talked about the interviewee. Let's talk about a bit of remuneration and benefits, right? So as an interviewee, I've got the job. How do we discuss this a little bit difficult conversation to have? Because sometimes we always feel like we're asking too much, or am I not asking enough? So where is a good start point?
So one of the strategy is, who are your referees? Your referees are the ones that can position your salary much better than you can. It's called endorsements, right? Very often people choose referees and have not had that discussion with the referees.
In my line of work, I encountered so many times, the referee don't even know they were named as a referee.
Say, huh? Hello? Who's this?
Oh, Alex put me. I didn't know he didn't tell me anything.
So the way I always advise my candidates to approach it is, first, be very honest about how much you're currently making. Never inflate that number. Because if you were honest, you can say, this is what I was making and I can substantiate with the proof. The employers are very happy that you were upfront. And if you were expecting a salary adjustment of, say, 20% or 10%, I think it's reasonable. What is acceptable market practice? But if you're looking for a step jump, because the responsibility is much higher, the scope is bigger, you travel a lot more, right? And you factor those of it in, right? First is to get a sanity check from people who are already in the industry. HR professionals, headhunters will give you an idea whether whatever you're looking for is reasonable or not. Then the next thing is, the referees are the ones that can vouch not only for character, but also for whether if they were to pay you that kind of amount of money, would they do it? If they leave with a good relationship with the existing boss are extremely powerful advocate.
Yeah.
But most people don't see that way. They say, I choose a referee from 3 jobs ago. Not necessarily your best bet.
Or they get their friend.
Yeah, that's not the best bet. The best bet is, who is your current employer? Because the current employer can be such a strong reference, right? They go back to the headhunter or the other company and say, look, this is what we're paying, X amount. If you're not paying them 40% more, then let them stay here. That's a step jump. If the relationship is there, this can always always be discussed. And it's extremely powerful. The other company will realize, hey, we are buying somebody over, and that company is willing to counter offer if we were not paying this. That's the best endorsement. Your company's telling somebody else what your worth is, rather than you yourself saying.
I love it. Yeah, that's a great analogy. It's a great way to spin things around. So, listeners, I hope you guys have found this episode useful. Once again, that was us with Andrew Chai. And Andrew, if they want to find more about your work, the stuff that you do, where should they go to find you?
LinkedIn, Andrew.Chai. Andrew.Chai is there are a lot of Andrew Chai in the world. Andrew.Chai, you'll find me on LinkedIn.
And we'll tag him when this episode is out. So if you guys enjoyed this episode, feel free to leave us your comments or any questions that you'd like to ask Andrew. And who knows, he might be back for another episode in the future. Until then, that's Alex and myself signing off, and we'll see you guys in the next episode. Thank you. Bye.